Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.
Today we are with Jeremy King, and we will talk later about it, but we are in one of his new ventures, which is called The Park. How would you call it? A brasserie?
It's a brasserie, a Grand Café is the name I like to give it, but it's slightly unusual because it's a Grand Café with a very, very strong American influence. And I've even called it a New World Grand Café. And it's me imagining what, instead of what normally happens in European cities, and certainly I've done in the past with brasseries, Grand Cafés, they tend to be early 20th century or late 19th century. So when I found this building, I thought, what would a more contemporary Grand Café look like? And it's against the background that modern restaurants, sadly nowadays, are so often quite basic. Poured concrete floors, painted walls, exposed ceilings, terrible acoustics. Would it be possible to create maybe a modern classic? So that's what I'm attempting to do.
So where are we?
We're actually on the corner of Queensway and Bayswater Road, and the restaurant's called The Park, and as it overlooks the park, we're in a new building which called Park Modern, which commands the best views of the park you could imagine from its penthouse. And it's an area which is being regenerated. The other end of Queensway, there is the Whiteley's development, and then other people are actually putting in a lot of time, effort, and indeed money into making Queensway what it should be. And why I was attracted to it is because we have this area, very close touching distance of central London, and midway between Notting Hill, Holland Park, and Marble Arch, for instance, which hasn't been particularly well served by restaurants, particularly not a large restaurant. And the thing I find about people is that whilst small restaurants can be incredibly attractive, there's also something about the communion of the community in a large restaurant, because it goes back onto my things which mean a lot to me, which is a restaurant being a catalyst for lots of different things to happen. As we walked through the restaurant, you saw a mutual friend doing a planning meeting with his designers. On the table next to them, it was actually a writer and her publisher. And it's this which intrigues me about restaurants, because I quite often say that if you look at all the great advances in literature, music, philosophy, art, politics, revolution, they all tend to start in a restaurant. A restaurant acts as that catalyst.
You're right. Good luck anyway for your new restaurant, but this restaurant is part of a trilogy, so we will talk later about that. But you started very young, wandering around Paris, looking at cafes and brasseries, from La Coupole to Leap to the Café Flore, the De Magot, and so on. And the brasseries everywhere in Paris, also in Pigalle and others. And more or less just after that, there was a new brasserie called Langen's that was opened in London near Piccadilly, and it was a very fashionable place where all the Rolling Stones, writers, and as you said, and famous people used to go. And there you had an idea. I mean, I think you met Chris Corbin there, right, your friend, and at that point you decided that you may want to create your own restaurant. And that's how you started with the Caprice.
Yes, very much so. A story for another time almost is that I was very influenced by a book called The Dice Man in the early 70s. Because I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, I felt that I was capable, but I wasn't sure doing what. I did often make decisions by the throw of a dice. And I'd been working in wine bar restaurant off the King's Road and waiting to go up as a mature student to university, and liked it sufficiently, I decided to stay. The problem with that is that I didn't have any formal education. I didn't know how to do it, and I felt that I made a big mistake. And I was about to leave, and then a brilliant as often the case in the hospitality industry, a brilliant guy who had a first-class degree from Harvard, who was a Rhodes Scholar to Oxford, and there he was as a maitre d'hotel at Joe Allen, which was a restaurant I loved. And the two best restaurants of the 70s was Joe Allen and Langen's Brasserie. And funny enough, Peter Langen, the eponymous Peter Langen, who loved the idea of a brasserie, he always used to say, I want a place where the Duchess can sit down at the table next to the taxi driver. And he was a genuine egalitarian, which always appealed to me as well. And he approached me as I was 25 years old and at Joe Allen and said, they tell me that you should open my next restaurant. Now, as it happens, the next restaurant never happened. We had a lot of fun touring London, looking at potential acquisitions. But in the meantime, I got to know Chris Corbin very, very well, and we resolved to open together because the Peter Langen opportunity was failing. So then we took the old Caprice site, which at the time, funnily enough, was called Arlington, and created Le Caprice. I was 27 years old. The working title was actually Joe Langen's, combination of Joe Allen and Langen's Brasserie. And it was the early days of us feeling that restaurants should be that catalyst. And it shouldn't be restaurants which dictate how people would use them, but we should facilitate them using them in a way that they hadn't before. And it's quite relevant that at that time, London was plagued by what was left of a very strong class system. And you had a class system in restaurants, upper class restaurants, middle class restaurants, working class restaurants. And you didn't cross the boundaries. Well, that's what people would say. So the fun that we had was trying to bring upper class, top class restaurant ideas to a middle of the road brasserie type of place. And hence Caprice started. And from there, we went on to open the Ivy, which actually took those ideas forward, although the Ivy had been there at that time some 70-odd years.
You had no dress code in that kind of restaurant anymore?
No.
I mean, you dress bespoke suits and all that, but not everybody did that and does, especially now, right?
Well, I think that's the case. And when we first opened at Le Caprice, there would be photographs in the newspaper of interesting people leaving, and I'd always get letters from around the country saying, I can't believe you allow somebody to come in with an open neck shirt and so on. I actually abhor dress code because what I know for sure is that in the 45 years or so I've been a restaurateur, probably at least 90% of the serious problems I've had with customers have been caused by what I would call oiks, wearing a suit and a tie. So I'm not sure where dress code gets to. I think more of a sort of behavior code is more relevant to me, and I'm a bit firmer. Funnily enough, I had somebody from the Daily Mail only last week writing saying, is there a lapse of standards at Arlington? I saw a man with two men wearing shorts, and I said, well, and luckily I was doing a riposte, and I Googled and saw that in the Mail themselves, 10 years before, they'd advocated wearing shorts to the office. It's all a nonsense. And people talk about, Glyndebourne people dress up. And I said, yes, but there's no dress code at Glyndebourne.
Yeah, but this was your idea of opening a restaurant like that, which at the time was the Caprice, that now you reopened again in the same premises with the same architecture, and it's called Arlington because of the name of the street. It's close to the Ritz, and it's also very close to one of the places you built, which had been very glamorous, the Wolseley Brasserie. But this was before time. Nowadays, restaurants are very fashionable. People have no dress codes anymore, nowhere in hotels, But you are kind of pioneer on that. We didn't talk about another thing, which is probably also very important, which is the quality of the food. To be a chef nowadays, it's a big job. Instead, many years ago, besides one or two very, very famous chefs, nobody knew chefs or wanted to be particularly a chef, right? So how do you cope with this? You were, let's say, pioneer in the style, in the kind of mixture of people in the restaurants, famous, unknown, wealthy, less wealthy, classic or blue jeans or whatever. What about the food? Who is so fussy today? I mean, not only because it has to be good and special, but it's no gluten, allergies. I mean, there's all that kind of things that didn't exist.
Well, that's true. And I must admit, I was very short with somebody only last night who was going on and on about their allergies, and that, to the point where they'd forgotten that they'd had certain allergies. There were so many. And I went to somebody I knew and has developed these allergies in the last few years, but they certainly didn't have them before. And I was outspoken to the point where I said, this is really getting silly. You've changed your orders. You're forgetting allergies you've got. And they said, well, don't you have any allergies? And I said, yes, you. And it's the nature of it. I think restaurants have to take control. I'm flattered that you think of me as being a pioneer, and I like to be a pioneer. I'm always been driven. My motto is Prince Tancredi and the Leopard, saying, if things are to remain the same, everything has to change. But you don't change the principles, the integrity, or any of those things, what you do, but we have to move forward. And with the food, it's interesting you were saying about it would tend to be named chefs who were doing something. What we believed is that we could produce the sort of food that people would really enjoy without, on the basis that it wasn't reliant on an ego or a particular chef or whatever it might be, that we would do it as a collaboration, a team effort. And one of the nicest commendations that had recently, and I've shown it onto the menu at Arlington, is we lost at the end of last year Russell Norman, who was quite an innovator in restaurants as well when he did Polpo. And just after he died, I was sent a video of him talking about the epiphany he had in 1991 when he went to Caprice and he had a Caesar salad, and he realized that simple food can still be terrific food. It doesn't have to be embellished and fussed with, and no chef needs tweezers to create good food. It was a very sad moment because I read this, and he talked about the fact that that day, this is back in 91, he'd just happened to buy Alistair Little's book called Keep It Simple. And by coincidence, here I was in 2024, I just bought an old copy of Alistair Little's book, Keep It Simple, for my new chef at Arlington because of the purity. And now, as it happens on the Arlington menu, there is the Caesar salad, but it's Russell's Caesar salad. And there are threads going back through to the 80s in London where things really did change. And when we opened Caprice, originally it had very, very bad acceptance in London. We survived because of the support we had more from Manhattan than we did from London itself.
American clients
understood it. They'd seen Odeon open in
New York.
Yeah, 2 or 3 months before, and kind of understood
McNally,
McNally, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the support we got was from the theatre and from artists, and we were very, very, very strongly supported by them. Often, though, they didn't have that much money, but they had great aspirations and discernment.
Your restaurants are not, I mean, I don't know about the wines, but the food is not particularly expensive. No. You know, whatever restaurant, from the Caprice at the time, the Arlington today, from the Wolseley or the Fishers or the Colbert to today's the Park, I mean, it's expensive, but not terribly expensive. You said American clients, which is understandable because the looks of the Caprice is a bit transatlantic, you know, like you could be on a boat. But then you opened Viennese restaurants like the Fishers or like the Wolseley that looks like a Viennese cafe. By the way, Lucian Freud, who was German-Austrian origin, you know, used to come every night. Lord Weidenfeld also, who was another one like Austrian, German, used to come every night because they probably loved the atmosphere.
Oh, he did, and he used to give us feedback at the Wolseley, and I'm very not that long before Lord Weidenfeld died, I said to him, we're opening a Viennese restaurant. And I should say at this point, I always react to the building for the idea as opposed to try and impose an idea. I don't think, oh, let's do a Viennese restaurant. That might be in my head. And then one day I see a building, I think this could be the Viennese. George Weidenfeld was my food advisor at Fisher's, which he enjoyed immensely because, and he would get so caught up in the nature of the sausages and so on, because he had an encyclopedic knowledge and extraordinary memory. And he used to help me on lots of things. When I built the hotel, which was very much based on the thought of that it may have opened just before the war and what was happening there and all the Americans who really saved England, Ed Murrow, Gil Wynant, Harriman, and he knew them all and he could remember them. I mean, better than I did through the books. But the food, I work on the basis that also is that the food should never be expensive. We should give people the opportunity to spend, but we don't make it mandatory because a lot of the most interesting people in a restaurant are the least affluent. And if you go into a very, very expensive restaurant, they're often very boring because the real life comes from the creative people, and the creative people often don't have that much money. And that was very much the situation with Caprice, is that the theatre loved it because we stayed open late and they could come in and just have eggs Benedict and a beer, and it didn't have to cost much. The artists felt exactly the same, and we were close to the Royal Academy at the time. And that's been the bedrock for the restaurants going forward. And I think it's something I often talk about, and certainly with the staff all the time, is that when restaurateurs look at people coming through the door as a source of income, they are giving themselves a finite life. If you look at people coming through the door instead as an opportunity, and the opportunity is to give somebody a good time, and you succeed, then you make money. It will come, but the motivation mustn't be money. And I'm often quoted because I talk about the difference between a restaurateur and a restaurant owner. And too many restaurants these days are under the auspices of restaurant owners. They do it from the boardroom. Restaurateurs do it from the floor. And that shows.
Most of your restaurants, the Ivy Group, the Caprice that now is reopened as Arlington, the Brasserie, the Wolseley, Austrian, the Colbert, French, are still there because you create these places and then things happen and you change your mind. Either you sell them or you get out. Now you create 3 new restaurants, right? What is the idea? I mean, the Arlington will be like more or less like the Caprice. Here we are at the park. You explain it's like a cafe. And what kind of cuisine we'll find at the park? It will be hamburgers,
there's an element,
sandwiches.
There's an element of that, that's for sure. Again, it's what people want to make of it. And it's open from 7 a.m. till last order's 11 at night. And I encourage people, they might come in and dressed in leggings during the daytime, and then they may dress up in the evening, but they don't have to. It goes back to that whole dress code thing. The process is that I was shown the building. I wasn't particularly interested even looking. Then I saw the building and reacted, and that's always the same with me. It has to be love at first sight with a restaurant. And I was shown it was a concrete shell. It had vinyls on the windows, but even so, the light was manifest. And I thought, this is the opportunity of a late 20th century, early 21st century Grand Cafe. And I thought, well, that works. And immediately I was thinking, what I like is when a restaurant in a new building feels as though it was conceived with the building. And there's no better example of that as far as I'm concerned than the Seagram building in New York, and what Philip Johnson did with the Four Seasons, as it was called then. It's now under different names, and that grill room with all that beautiful paneling. So I love going on gut instinct. I love using instruments which are getting these days somewhat devalued: instinct, intuition, all those fields. And I thought, well, I know what it's going to look like, but what am I going to serve food-wise? So I was thinking about it. Then unusually, I'm going to give it its name. I normally wait till the end. And then it seemed to me it had to be called The Park. And I thought, The Park feels American. And there's an American feel to what I want to do with the interior. I thought, if my restaurateur chef friends in New York had this building on Central Park, what would they do? And it took me back to the emergence of an American cuisine. A lot of people would call Californian Italian cuisine, which came around in the 70s and 80s. Alice Waters, Jeremiah Towers, Larry Forgione, people like that, suddenly just were demanding and getting fine ingredients and doing very simple European influence food, but with a strong American tradition behind it. And then I started to think about, in the 30s, what were we doing in Europe? We were creating brasseries and so on. What happened to the people who went to the New World? And a lot of that went into more diner-esque type of environments. And there's a hint of diner about this place. Fundamentally, though, a restaurateur will succeed if...
You say diners because there are booths.
Yes, the booths and
because it's made, with...
They were the meeting place for a lot of communities.
So there is a brassy open space, but with privacy.
Yeah, with privacy. And I mean, you've hit upon a really, really important aspect for me, is that in the restaurateurs should open restaurants they want to go to. What I like in a restaurant is a corner table or a booth. Those are my favorites. The privacy, as you say. A lot of restaurants don't like that, because what you end up doing is, in the space where you could put 4 tables of 2 sitting opposite, do it my way, you only get 3 tables, because you've got 2 corners and then one with opposite. So you reduce your capacity by 25%, but everybody has a better time. And a lot of restaurants, they may have 2, 3, 4 corners or maybe booths. Some have more. Fisher's, which you mentioned, had 14 corners or booths. The Park has 28 booths or corners. It's quite unusual. It could be a much bigger restaurant.
So the cuisine will be American, California, Italian.
Very, very strongly influenced on that basis, yeah.
That's in lunch or dinner time. Otherwise, it's breakfast, eggs, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, the breakfast it'll have pancakes and French toast and all the healthy dishes that one would want. And slightly more American things like, one of my favorites, which I've always enjoyed from America, is one-eyed Pete's, which is a brioche bread with the center taken out and an egg fried in the middle of the bread. Just simple things like that. So the wine list is Italian or North American, primarily Californian. So it's a little bit a specialist restaurant, but I like to think that anybody will find something.
It is a large question. I mean, before you used to do Austrian, French. Now we changed, because Caprice is Anglo-American, but it's British. Here you said it's more like American. But the big news is that you will reopen Simpson's, which is a very famous old restaurant, famous for the roast beef, right? People used to go there and eat the roast beef. I don't remember, it was Saturday especially, or one day.
Or indeed
day.
Sundays, yeah.
That's next to the Savoy Hotel in the Strand, nearby Covent Garden in a sense, right? So before you were more concentrated in the center, and now you open 3 restaurants in 3 other parts of London. London is a city made of many villages or many centers. There's no only one center, right? So you think that the location, I mean, the question is complicated. The location is very important, and Simpson is for you, I imagine, an achievement, right? To give life again to a very classic place and very English.
Well, very much so.
So you are more Anglo-American nowadays than you were. I mean, you left a little bit the Eastern, Central European.
Yes, although, funnily enough, there's always different facets. And the thing about Simpson's, which I first got close to acquiring after we sold the Ivy, Caprice and Chica's group, and that came after Chris had been ill and there was fears of meltdown in the world, etc. And we'd been offered substantial amount of money. And Chris was recovering and didn't have insurance, life insurance and so on. So it was too attractive not to take it. And we thought, well, okay, we'll sell that. And then I wanted to do a hotel. But I also was fascinated by Simpsons. So even back in 2000, I was negotiating with Savoy. And I did it again 10 years ago. And then the opportunity came up once more just 2 years ago. I love it. It goes back in many ways to what we did before, the big old restaurants like Ivy and so on. So many have gone. I mean, Langan's was at Coq d'Or. And they're all disappearing. And Simpsons is the last Grand Dame restaurant to not be upgraded. It is a massive restaurant. There's 2 large restaurants, a very large event space, 2 bars, and it has all that tradition. And just as with Arlington, I spent a lot of time, effort, and actually money in making it look as though nothing had changed. And the same will happen with Simpsons. And I expect people to come in and say, oh, good, it's much the same as it was before. The trolleys will be there, but it will be done with the Prince Tancredi mentality.
Yeah, that
everything has to change, but change is normal. And doing it, I'm immensely excited. And I like the juxtaposition of the 3 types of restaurants. There was the refurbishment of a 1980s restaurant.
The Arlington. There's a completely brand new restaurant here, although we're sitting surrounded by these P. Horst photographs, Babe Paley over there from the 50s and Lee Radziwill up on the wall there. It's not, there's a suggestion it may have been here for quite a long time, and a lot of people feel that way when they walk in. Simpsons is, by the time we open it, will be 3 years short of its 200th anniversary of opening. It's really quite an extraordinary icon. I think it's 3rd oldest restaurant in London. Rules is older. And I'm immensely excited by it. And I'm trying to get a lot of really mature staff. I want it to feel as though nothing's changed, that it's carried on before. Somebody who didn't know would walk in and think, oh my gosh, it must have been like this for 200 years. And so I'm immensely excited. And you talk about villages. I mean, there are opportunities come up elsewhere. I still nurture a desire to go back to Chelsea. That's always a possibility. So that would be the 4th place.
That would probably be the 4th place.
But it's not yet matured.
No, not just yet. And I've done it domestically where I live in the past a great deal, and certainly with the restaurants. I like going into unusual areas, and a lot of people think of the Strand and so on as being over and finished, but it's really changed a lot. And Nick Jones and working with Mark Waller on the 180 Strand development is suddenly changing that area. I was told this area here in Bayswater would never work, that nobody would want to come. It was a terrible location. And one man was telling me this and said, oh, no, you should have got a better location and so on. And I said, well, what is a good location? He said, well, where people will come, and you won't be successful unless it's got easy accessibility and short travel time to get there and so on and so forth. I said, you mean like the River Cafe? And they said, you're taking the mickey, aren't you? I said, yes, because if you do something well, people will come to it. And that's what Ruthie did with the River Cafe, and people were only too happy to go out. So I like not being mainstream. I like being a little bit, you very kindly said earlier on, I was pioneering, and I like that. I like to be pioneering.
But what has changed is that once upon a time, of course, you could eat in a cafe quickly, a sandwich or something, or brioche, but people would go to the restaurant with the children, or they will celebrate anything, a wedding, anniversary, a birthday. It was exceptional to go to the restaurant. Nowadays, people go to the restaurants all the time, so to go to a restaurant is not anymore, unless gourmet, they want to go to this chef new restaurant or explore this new Japanese or Thai restaurant, which of course is another experience, right? Your restaurants seem to be, especially the park, seem to be restaurants where people go without too much fuss. You know, they just go because they want to meet someone, and therefore there is not a cuisine, you don't go there because. Nevertheless, for instance, Simpson, we just said, famous for the roast beef. So you're not going to Simpson to order spaghettis, maybe, right? What about the other? What about the Caprice? There is something that is special, the best hamburger in London, or that you want to go there because you remember that I tell you something, myself, I like the endive salad, which normally it's white. Now, you make endive salad at the Caprice, and then I went to both restaurants and to the Arlington, where you built like a little tower of endives, which are white and red, or white and red, and the aesthetics of this is particular. And when I came at the Arlington, after so many years that I didn't go to the Caprice, I asked, do you have endive salad? And it came the same way, right? So, as you said, endive salad is something you can make in your own kitchen at home, but that was the feeling, or I remember the steak tartare, was particular there, which are simple things, obviously.
Well, they are simple, and it's interesting how people do gravitate to the familiar and then look at the more avant-garde, more innovative as well. But I've noticed how much people like to go back to the same restaurant if they can. There's a certain reassurance. And then there's the old saying is, the best restaurant is the restaurant you're known best. And I think there's a lot to be said. And listen, 81, when we opened Caprice, they did a survey to ask in the country, and of course, remember, it's the United Kingdom rather than Italy or France, etc. So how often did people eat out in a restaurant, a white tablecloth restaurant of an evening? And the figures came back for the UK that it was less than once a year. Now, for less than once a year, when remembering that even those days, some people were eating out 150 to 200 times a year. It meant that a high proportion of people never went to a restaurant. And I celebrate the fact that they can now. I do also feel that we need clarity. In funny ways, Arlington is historically, because we were trying to introduce new things, and something which is completely normal now was considered to be outrageous at the time, which is, for instance, we did a section where you could have dishes as a starter or a main course. You could have the notion that in a proper restaurant, you could either have an eggs Benedict, small eggs Benedict, or a large one in a restaurant. People thought that was ridiculous, that's not proper restaurant.
Salad and large.
And what people would want. Having said that, I think what's critical in restaurants, people need to know where they are. That Arlington, effectively Caprice, transcended that. But a lot of the restaurateuring nowadays, people are putting on what people will buy. I had a guy come in here on Sunday and said, I can't believe you're not doing roast beef. I said, why not? I can't believe that you can't believe. And he said, well, it's Sunday. I said, yes, but that doesn't mean roast beef. And this is not a British restaurant or anything. But everybody wants that on a side. I said, no, they don't. We actually tried it at Arlington and there wasn't a big pickup. But you wouldn't go into a Chinese restaurant and expect roast beef. And he said, well, it would sell well. I said, well, maybe. And I said, actually, sushi would probably sell well if I put that on. There's a number of things which would sell well. But you immediately diminish the restaurant because nobody knows where they stand. One of the most important words, I think, for any business, whether it's restaurants or retailing or journalism or whatever it might be, the most important word is authority. And it's the authority that people believe what you're doing, trust what you're doing, feel that you know what you're talking about, what you're offering. And I love clarity in a restaurant, which I feel with the park that we have of a particular niche in history, but it's important. And when it comes to a restaurant, we all use restaurants for different reasons. If we just asked ourselves in this room, why did we last go to a restaurant? And certainly if I walked around the room at lunchtime today, somebody said, oh, I'm here for a business meeting. I'm here for an interview. I'm here with my family. I'm here to celebrate my anniversary, my birthday. I'm here to seduce. I'm here to divorce. I'm here to do any number of things. Great restaurants allow all those things to happen. And when I walk into a restaurant, what I like is ideally to be recognized by the maitre d'hotel and by name, but even if I'm not, to almost be scooped up off the ground and taken to my table, and I'll see interesting people. I might see friends. I might see people who shouldn't be together. I might see somebody famous. I sit down at let's say a table of 6. I don't want people on their phones taking photographs or talking or texting, etc. I want them to be communicating. The lift one gets in the spirits by the conviviality of our friends is immense. Or there may not be close friends, but interesting people. And halfway through the main course, for instance, I want somebody to stop and say, you know what, this is really rather good. And somebody else says, and it's very fairly priced. Yes, that's why we like coming here, and then go on with it. So the restaurant doesn't dominate, the food doesn't dominate. They're all things which coalesce into enjoyment and happiness, and rather than, a lot of people go to restaurants for a sense of obligation. The reason I like big restaurants and brasserie-type restaurants is because often the best nights are when people decide at half an hour's notice. You know, they might be at a gallery opening and say, hey, let's go down the road together. They're the fun. The bookings which are made 3 months in advance, come that evening, the chances of all those 6 people in a party actually being in the right mood or really wanting to go out, but they feel obliged and they're going through the motions.
But what you said is also interesting, is that, first of all, people like to be recognized. They like the same restaurants, and they like to be close to home. I mean, there are 2 different experiences. Let's say you want to go to visit the National Gallery or the Portrait Gallery, or you stay at the new Raffles Hotel, or you are in Covent Garden, or you work at Coutts Bank, then you will want to go to Simpson, right? Or you come out of Charing Cross. I mean, it's nearby there. As much as, you know, people like sort of locals, right? And nowadays, there is in every hub city of the world, I think of New York, Paris, London, Milan, others, people decide, should I eat Japanese, Italian, brasserie? I mean, these are different ways, but they all should be in your area, because people who go to restaurants regularly are lazy. Right? If they live in Chelsea, they don't want to go to Simpson every day, unless they may want to go if it is an experience, right? Or maybe tourists, you know, hotel concierge will say, you know, there's this new opening, and as much as they go to see Buckingham Palace or to visit the British Museum, they may say, go to Simpson if you want to have a British, you know, experience and all that.
Yes.
So I agree with that. But big cities like this are neighbor. Most of the time you go in the local.
A lot. But there again, we go out for different reasons. So I like to think that if you're going to the Opera House, if you want to eat before or indeed afterwards, Simpsons would be a choice because it's walking distance. People did used to move around a lot. When we first opened Caprice in the 80s, we had a massive post-theatre business because there weren't many places to go. And funnily enough, it's come round full circle that it's hard to get a post-theatre meal in that sort of Covent Garden, Theatreland or Shaftesbury Avenue areas. It's weird. As it happens, what I've got at Simpsons, because I really want to encourage the theatre fraternity and theatre goers to come there, I've got a bar in the basement which will have a separate side entrance, almost like a speakeasy, which has a 3 a.m. license. And I'm very keen to encourage that, to have people transcend this. You either eat before or drink before and then go home, or you forget it. And I agree with you that things stay locally, but there again, what people define as local is quite interesting. And I was very struck when 10 years, 12 years ago, when we opened Colbert, and people would come and they say, oh, thank God you've done this. You know, you're my local. I said, oh, yeah, so where do you live? And they'd give an address in Battersea. is that local or Fulham or something? And it's the sense of it tends to be within striking distance. Whereas if you're just saying, hey, let's get some dinner tonight, you wouldn't go to Simpson's. But here it's been interesting, even the short time we've been open, the number of people who are saying, oh, we've so needed something in the area. And I said, well, there are other restaurants. I said, yes, but not a large restaurant. You save us the need to go into the West End, because there is that sense of occasion. And, we might have visitors coming in from abroad, and that's why they'd choose to go to the Wolseley, because that was unusual and it was very impressive. And if I get Simpson's right, I think it'll become a destination, but more for the experience as opposed to specifically the food.
What is the key of your success? I mean, one thing I noticed that I know of as being a client of yours in many different restaurants of yours is that you are there. And to give you an example, which has nothing to do with you personally, I always admired in Venice at the Iris Bar men like Arrigo Cipriani, who's now rather old, who doesn't really need but he's there every meal, every lunch, every dinner, and he eats there, but he wakes up, he goes to the table and say, would you like a little bit of wine? What do you, are you happy with this, And you mentioned Ruti Rogers and the River Cafe. Ruti is another person like that, that goes, she's always there Sunday lunch or Saturday lunch, and they are friends, but they're also clients, and she spends a little time with them. In London, there was another Italian famous restaurant called San Lorenzo many years ago, where the two owners, Mara and Lorenzo, were like that, sitting at the table for a moment, give you... So people love that. And I think you are a little bit like this, you stay in the restaurant. You don't work in the restaurant, but you go and chat. And
I kind of work. I am not essential.
I mean, not that you don't work, but your work is not to say, what do you want to eat, or...
No. And I interact quite a lot. I was actually joking with somebody recently, is that as I get older, the problem for me and other older restaurateurs is that we've been deprived of one of our great uses is by the ban on smoking in restaurants. Because around Europe, I always used to notice in Italian restaurants, French restaurants, even Spanish restaurants, there was often an older guy, sometimes woman, going around the tables quite slowly, shuffling around the table, changing the ashtrays. And because it gave them an opportunity to interact with people by being at the table without actually getting involved in the service. And people often say to me, they'll find me on a Saturday night in a restaurant. Why are you here on a Saturday night? And I say, well, because the easiest way to do this is the hard way, and to put in the time. And it goes back to what I was saying about the difference between a restaurateur and a restaurant owner. And yes, customers, of course, are incredibly important in their happiness, but so is that of the staff. And if the staff see that I care and that I'm with them, and that I go, if things are going wrong, that I take the blame with them as opposed to them just shouldering all the difficulties, I get a happier staff. Staff generally prefer to work for restaurateurs and restaurant owners because decisions get made in a different way. And when things are hard, it's very easy to make brutal decisions in a boardroom. It's very hard to make brutal decisions on the floor because you're looking the person in the eye, you're working with them, they're your colleague. And I can only do it if I'm a restaurateur, if I'm on the floor. It's really important.
In the summer, particularly in the summer in London, there are many people I see in restaurants are Middle Eastern clients. Is it something new?
It's comparatively new, but there was a period when Russians first emerged. And I remember that period when we were starting to see a lot more Middle East customers in London, and they behaved in a different way. The new generation Middle East are actually very sophisticated, but the point being is that, and goes back really to the nature of your question, is that as a restaurateur, we must never, ever allow any particular group dominate a restaurant. And that can go back to, I remember Adrian Gill writing very well about this, and he would don't misunderstand me. And his intention, he would talk about never allow any tribe dominate a restaurant. But what he would mean is, it's great to have a few people from advertising, some publishing, some actors, different businesses in your restaurant. If one section dominates, it's bad for the restaurant. If you get too many advertising people, and then the really interesting people are driven away. So whether it's different nationalities, backgrounds, etc., one needs a balance. And now that often means keeping your nerve. And because just like when the British were imperialist in countries around the world, they got indulged because they had the money. And the trouble is in London is whoever has the money often gets kowtowed to in the quest for money, but it's a short-sighted vision. It's not the way to make it work. So for me, it's about curating a room and having balance.
We didn't talk about the personnel. I mean, the waiters, the people in the kitchen, and all that. If I am not wrong, until Brexit, there were lots of Polish and Italian people around, and some of them, or many of them, went back to their countries after Brexit. What has changed? What kind of personnel you have, and what is important? I mean, when you hire something, do you teach something to them? I mean, there is a Jeremy King style or code that you ask to the people you hire.
Yes, but I think somebody like Danny Meyer out of New York encapsulates it, is that I look for attitude above aptitude in many ways, because you can teach people how to do things. And what we're finding now is a greater cross-section. When pre-Brexit, the number of nationalities we had, for instance, in the Corbin and King group, which are Wolseley, Delaunay, etc., varied between 55 and 65 nationalities, which is extraordinary to contemplate. I don't know what the number is now, and because I'm only growing a big enough sample statistically in terms of staff, I bemoan every day the loss of the Italians, the French, the Spanish, every day. But they are starting to come back, and there are ways to bring them into the country. Interestingly, one of the most important saving graces for restaurants has been actually a lot of Indian employees, particularly in kitchens. Extraordinary work ethic, great loyalty. There are a lot of restaurants, some of my old restaurants, which might have as many as 15 to 20 in there. Now, we have to go through a special visa system to do it, but we're now starting to build up. I mean, the Polish, we were starting to lose prior to Brexit. They were starting to go back. The differential on the earnings wasn't as big. And they were getting encouraged to come home by their own governments because they realized there's been such a drain. I think it's just a question of an adjustment, and we'll find our way through. One of the things which I've been doing for 10, 15 years has been actually encouraging older people to come into the industry or return to the industry or find different ways just of how we work. There's a lot of women who feel precluded from hospitality and kitchens and so on because of children. But actually, if you change all the rota systems and just be innovative. The problem is with the British is compared with, say, the Americans or many Europeans, is that we like to moan about our situation as opposed to do something about it or complain even. And there's a very big difference between complaining and moaning. The British too often moan because that doesn't achieve anything. I don't know if you know the writer John Lanchester. He wrote a very good piece for the New Yorker once about the difference. And actually, if we use intellectual resources, we can find a way through it.
What do you tell them? What do you need from the people who work for you?
They'll tell you is that when I address them all, I talk about the communication and smiling and actually making people believe that you're happy to see them. Transcends technical ability always. We all want to be loved. I gave a lecture to, as funnily enough, not long before I left the previous restaurants, where to all the reception staff, I said, I'm going to replace you all with AI. And they're looking at me and they said, is he serious? I said, no, I'm going to replace you all with AI. And why wouldn't I? AI is never late, never preoccupied with what they're doing that night, not surreptitiously trying to look at their phone. They've not got a hangover from the night before. AI sees somebody walk through the door. They're perfectly capable of saying, good evening, do you have a reservation, so on and so forth. And all these different things AI can do so much better. So why wouldn't I replace them? And they're looking at me and I said, well, I tell you why I wouldn't replace you with AI. It's because AI doesn't have intuition, doesn't have empathy or sympathy, instinct, and they can't love. All things that you can do, but you don't. So you're bad AI, whereas you can transcend AI. And for me, those are the ingredients which help us give people a good time. So that sense that they really do care about me. And what I've recognized over the years is that when people often say to me, they're brilliant, that member of staff, technically they're probably the worst person. Often the ones that the customers think are the best waiters, actually, as far as the management concerned, are the worst waiters, but they make people feel good. And we all want to feel good.
When you come in one of your restaurants, you look at the clients and you look at the service, I imagine.
Yeah.
You know, you have a double eye. That's what you do.
I have to do the double eye. But, funnily enough, one of the lessons I got inadvertently was from Nick Jones from Soho House days. And I was waiting for him in a restaurant of his, Cicconi's. And as it happens, he was late and he came through the door and he looked over to see that I was there. But he made a point of saying hello to the receptionist. And then the manager came up and he gave them a hug and said, lovely. And then as he came to the table, he shook hands with the old waiter and said, thank you, and sat down. And he didn't look at the customers. And I said to him, you've just taught me something. He said, I don't think so. I said, yes, because you looked after the staff. And I realized that as time goes on, it is impossible for me to see every customer when they come in, but I can see every member of staff every day, and they see every customer. So if I impart to them a belief that generosity and friendliness and spirit or smiles, etc., is the norm, they'll convey that to the customers.
Now you're 70, you started at 27. Do you still have the same passion or love for this métier of yours, that to be a restaurateur?
I do, and strangely more so. I mean, the difference being is that I relish it, I enjoy it, I'm trying to improve all the time, I'm trying to empower staff, I'm trying to look at it in a different way to make people really believe they're in it. For me, it's exciting. Back in those days, I had a lot of fear, and fear is corrosive and damaging in anybody.
Fear of failing.
Fear of failure, fear of any number of things going wrong. Now I'm still apprehensive about things going wrong, and I try and anticipate, and I go through the anxiety of I open a restaurant. I never assume I've got it right. I assume I've got it wrong. And I use a technique over the last few years is I write reviews of my restaurants before they've opened. So I work out.
Sometimes maybe you have an immediate success, but as you said, for the Caprice, it wasn't the case at the beginning. How long does it take to understand if it will go or not?
Well, it's a very, very important and astute question, of course. And I remember when opens Brasserie Zadel, which was quite unusual because it was very, very affordable and was reliant on my mission on that was saying, create more of a canteen for the affluent and a treat for the student, but everybody could afford to go. If you could afford to go to a restaurant at all, you could definitely go there. And I remember about a year into it, and we still weren't breaking even. And my board and investors at the time said, Jeremy, when are you going to admit defeat? When are you going to understand that this is never going to work? This is a vanity project. You're being stubborn. This could bring the company down. When are you going to understand that? I said, not just yet, because again, it comes back to a feeling whether you've got it right. And they do say that one of the great assets of any businessman, businesswoman, whatever field they're in, is to recognize failure early and say, no, it's not going to work. I've closed one restaurant, which was
Piccadilly.
there's St. Alban, yes. And ironically, I hear more about that restaurant from people now than I did then. We didn't get it right, and it was a really big learning curve for me because we kind of did it by committee, and there was elements of that restaurant which were fantastic, but partly before its time, partly it didn't have the conviction. And it's when I learnt that wonderful lesson where they say that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And in a way, that restaurant was a bit of a camel. The camel works. It gets people there. It's cheaper. There's all sorts of good things about camels. But actually, when you want a horse, you need a horse. And recognizing that you've created a camel, despite its assets, early is the way to understand. But I think within 3 months you've got a good chance. But if it's not working after a year, then you have to make that decision.
Is the Arlington now going well?
Arlington's going very well. Arlington was incredible from the start, and it's more been happy problems of trying to control it.
So good luck for the park, and good luck afterwards for Simpsons. This will be open in the fall, in the autumn.
I still haven't been handed the property yet, so it'll be 6 months from then. So I think it's probably going to be February.
Beginning of next year.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us
much.
today.
Oh, great pleasure.
Powered by Dr. Podcast, your audio factory, turning ideas into a signature sound.